Good morning. My name is Patrick Lonergan, and I'm delivering this paper from Galway, which is in the west of Ireland. You can see a bit of it here behind me on my Zoom background. It doesn't always look like this. What I want to talk to you about today is the Anthropocene and the fact that many people now believe that we are living in this new geological epoch called the Anthropocene, an epoch defined by the destructive impact of the human species upon our planet. But there's been some disagreement about when that era actually began. Some scientists propose we should mark its beginning in 1945 with the first detonation of the atomic bombs in that year. Others say we should go back to the 1760s, to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But there is also a suggestion that it began in the time of Shakespeare, in the year 1610, with the Orbis spike. The Orbis spike is a low point in the presence of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, which was almost certainly caused by the colonization of the Americas and the ensuing collapse of the indigenous populations there. Since the 1990s, there have been many books and articles about Shakespeare and the environment, some of which are displayed on the screen right now. These cover a very wide range of topics, but collectively they argue that Shakespeare's plays stage an early modern ecological consciousness, as Randall Martin puts it. But in this brief presentation, I want to ask what it might mean to start thinking about Shakespeare's plays and early modern drama more generally as being written and staged at the beginning of the Anthropocene. My suggestion is that just as geologists can form theories about our climate based on the chemical composition of rock, so can theatre historians help to explain the origins of the Anthropocene by looking through the layers of our culture's past. This in turn offers us ways to think about how theatre practitioners now might revive early modern plays, using them to answer questions about our present and indeed about our future as well. As a starting point, I think it can be constructive to imagine that today's weather was caused, if only in a very small way, by theatre performances from the past. And we can say that in lots of different ways. I mean, first of all, we know that theatre makers burned fossil fuels when they staged plays in the past, whether because they were using gas to illuminate their stage or because they were using oil to transport their sets from one place to another. But we also know that theatre has always both mirrored and shaped cultural attitudes. But it's also shaped our understanding of the real, of reality. Amitav Ghosh has noted that one of the causes of the climate crisis is what he calls the Great Derangement, which, to oversimplify a book-length argument, is the suggestion that our ideas about realism have developed in such a way that it's difficult for us to represent the realities of climate change without that seeming like science fiction or fantasy. So if theatre has contributed to our great derangement in some ways, then perhaps it can be instructive and useful for us to return to the past in order to see what dramatists meant when they wrote about the so-called real world. Now, of course, there's no way that dramatists like Shakespeare knew anything about the CO2 content of the atmosphere in 1610. But of course, we can detect evidence in their work of a belief that human life is part of nature, it's not separate from it. And this has been the subject of a lot of scholarship going back 25 years. Gabriel Egan, for example, has explored Shakespeare's work in the context of James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis. And I think we can also find evidence in early modern drama of a dawning intuition that human activity could have planetary consequences, and that some of those consequences could be destructive. In such a context, we can start to think again about how we interpret things like the decision by Thomas Dekker to dedicate his play Satyromastix to the world when that play was published in 1602. What do we make of Ben Jonson's play, The Magnetic Lady, and its use of planetary magnetism as a way to think about the relationships between his characters? All of these questions have been asked before, but my point is that asking them in the context of the origins of the Anthropocene era allows us to think about reviving plays in ways that can inspire agency and decision-making today. For example, in a recent outdoor production of A Midsummer Night's Dream in Kilkenny Castle, the Irish theatre company Rough Magic explored how the conflict of Titania and Oberon can be seen in the context of the Anthropocene. So they explicitly named that as something that they were interested in thinking about. We remember the lines. With thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport, Titania says. Therefore the winds piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which, falling in the land, have every pelting river made so proud that they have overborne the continents. And through this distemperature, we see the seasons alter. This idea has been explored in academic scholarship before many times, but it's now much easier for audiences to hear in Titania's words a sense of how their own behavior might make the winds more destructive, might cause the rivers to overbear the continents. This production was performed outdoors. It was at the mercy of the rain that is an inevitable feature of an Irish summer, and that's significant too. As my fellow panelist Sophie Chiari has written, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, wetness informs the play as a whole. And you can see how wetness affects the production in all sorts of ways. You can see from the way the costume for Titania is designed in the background there. You'll also see the way in which the audience had to huddle together for warmth, despite the fact that it was August. These characteristics make even more immediate the play's treatment of the relationship between decision-making and planetary upheaval. But if you're involved in the theatre, there's a pretty good chance that if you hear the year 1610, what you will think about is the play The Tempest. So what, if anything, would it mean to stage that play as one of the first works of the Anthropocene? The Tempest demonstrates a stronger sense than in Shakespeare's earlier plays that what we now think of as nature is often seen through the lens of what we now think of as culture. Then there's the question of how we might stage the masque, in which Ceres and Juno and Iris are eventually joined by a group of dancing nymphs and reapers. That scene is sometimes staged as a celebration of the natural world. Certainly in productions in Ireland, that's true. But in the Anthropocene era, it seems more important that it's also an illusion. Thinking, of course, of Prospero's famous lines, these are actors, we're all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. That might explain why recent productions of the play have made the presentation of nature seem more artificial than realistic. So, for example, in the 2016 Royal Shakespeare Company production of the play, the art that is used to create nature is really easily detected. We know we're not watching an illusion of reality, but a computer-generated reinterpretation of reality. Similarly, in the 2013 Globe production of the play, we can see from the costumes and some of the set pieces there how, again, artificiality is being emphasized over the supposedly natural. The Tempest has often been thought of in relation to colonialism and slavery, of course. Broadening those debates out to include the fact that the play coincides with the beginning of the Orbis spike allows us to bring climate change into a dialogue with slavery, with colonialism, and to see the interconnections. In an article for Nature in which they tried to define when the Anthropocene started, Simon Lewis and Mark Maslin write as follows. The choice of 1610 as the beginning of the Anthropocene would probably affect the perception of human actions on the environment. The Orbis spike implies that colonialism, global trade, and coal brought about the Anthropocene. And then really importantly, they say that the event or date chosen as the inception of the Anthropocene will affect the stories people construct about the ongoing development of human societies. In such a context, I think we might meaningfully propose that reading and staging Shakespeare can offer answers to questions that geology or chemistry or geography have found inconclusive. Shakespeare is one of the stories that people can construct about the ongoing development of our societies. To say that the Anthropocene started during the time of Shakespeare is to understand that human activity can have an impact that lasts far longer than the span of a single human life. And that too is a theme that dominates Shakespeare's work. Thinking about it in that way allows us to reread and reperform Shakespeare in new ways, but also to see that these plays contain knowledge, wisdom, and insight that can answer questions that are urgent right now. Thanks for listening.